Yeah, remember that Lovin' Spoonful song? Did you ever have to make up your mind? Well, it's not quite like that. What this particular episode of your favorite collaboratorium, unless you prefer the exit ramp, of course, because now we have not one, but two collaboratoriums on the Overnightscape Underground. But this is the Overnightscape Central, in case you're listening to this on some random plaything and you have no idea what's going on. Otherwise, I'm going to assume that you either went to a page and hit play for this specific show, or you downloaded this and you are now listening to this program on the device of your choice or someone else's. It's I am PQ Ribber, and if I sound confused, maybe I am. But this is yet another in the ongoing, almost endless series of Overnightscape Central shows, and we are talking about changed minds. That's right. It's especially in today's climate here in the autumn coming, the tail end of summer. Autumn starts what? Oh, no, we are now, I think we have now officially become autumn, just perhaps even today. But now that it is autumn, there's, well, not that anything had changed since summer, except maybe gotten weirder, but that's been going on for a measurable amount of time. Yeah, we got all this political stuff and border stuff and kufi stuff and what they're doing to perhaps remedy the kufi stuff. We are in a contentious time. And yes, each and every day, a lot of people, that we got a lot more time to think, a lot of us, and people are changing their minds. Not a lot. Well, a lot. Who knows? Because our media is really hitting this weird, hard edge that if they have a narrative and it's got to fit. If it don't fit, you must acquit. I don't know. But I am not here to tell you what to think. Let me make that clear. Unlike, I'm just telling you to think. That's my ideal situation, and I may say what I think, or interject, or suggest that I feel or think a certain way. But I am not here as some pontiff of much of anything. I'm just riding this boat and sharing my experience and reacting like anybody else oughta, and trying to do as much due diligence and figure stuff out. I am not out to change anybody's mind specifically. I would just like to see more people do a little bit more independent research using something like DuckDuckGo, or just let somebody try to red pill you. I mean, and try, I mean, you don't have to be gullible, but try not to fight every step of the way. Yeah, at some point on this particular show, I will do my best to describe my big mind change of 2016. And my mind changes, well, I don't know. I do change my mind, and I am. Oh, believe me, I would love to believe that if we all stick a mask on and get jabs, this is all going to just go away. But I think it's fairly apparent that that is a fallacious way of thinking. And if you're thinking that I'm wrong, I'm not saying that I'm 100% right. This is what I think. And with that out of the way, we have at least three contributions so far in the folder here, if I am not mistaken, and we are going to start things rolling with our friend Doc Sleaze.
I was once told that after a certain age, once you become an adult, one's views on things, opinions on things become set and are only changed as a result of major life changes or trauma. And I was told this during one of those useless training courses that one gets sent on at work many years ago. And I thought at the time, I think that's nonsense. I think it's just one of those things that people come up with and say to make it sound as if they are, knowledgeable or something. It's stated as fact. Yet where is the research for it? How do you back this up? Well, the course, as I recall, was one of those courses about racism, attitudes towards race and whatever. And I think this was the thing to say that, once people's views on race and so on are formed, it's next to impossible to change them. Which isn't really true at all. Most views on things like race, say, are culturally based. I don't mean they're not culturally. They're part of the culture that you grew up in, usually, or spent time in. But that culture itself is based upon ignorance, in that its prejudice are based a bigotry. They're not based on actual knowledge of other cultures, which it then tells you are bad and you should be prejudiced against because they're inferior to you, etc., or they view you as being inferior or whatever. And the reality is, in my experience, that if people who hold these views, whatever their race, creed or colour is, if they have a prejudice against people from some other race, creed or colour, or even virtually all other race, creeds, if they actually spend time around people of another culture, of these other cultures, I don't know if they have workmates who they can't avoid dealing with closely. I don't know, or maybe they have neighbours they can't avoid dealing with. After a while, once they learn more about them, they suddenly start thinking, well, maybe they're not all like that. And once you've made that decision that, well, maybe they're not all like that, then you start thinking, well, maybe I shouldn't make the generalisation. Maybe I should just try and accept people on an individual basis and say, regardless of the race, creed or colour, they could be good, bad, indifferent, whatever. That's not one of the factors. Race, creed and colour are really the factors that define people's characters. But there you go. So in that sense, yes, people's minds, even on something that seems as fundamental as racial attitudes, can be changed. But the key to it is experience. You have to experience things. I don't think you can necessarily change people's minds on particular strongly held beliefs on the basis of argument or persuasion, no matter how rational your arguments might be. They're so attached to their particular worldview, you're not going to move them. They'll always try and find some way of countering them. But if they experience something which demonstrates that maybe the precepts upon which they are basing their worldview might not be correct, then they are much more likely then to change their minds. That's that's my experience. And it isn't just true of big things. I know it through personal experience. I mean, I've changed my mind on many, many things in my life on the basis of observation, personal experience that has challenged my preconceptions. And I've argued myself round. People in the past may have tried to argue me to their point of view, and that didn't move me. But coming to it myself did. If I'm making any sense here, I'm not sure I am. But we do this more than we care to admit, because we do like to think that all of our beliefs are strongly held and unassailable. They are absolutely correct and based, and we always like to deceive ourselves into believing that all our views, etc., are based entirely upon our own experience, when they're not. A lot of the time, it's received wisdom that we get from our peer groups, from our families growing up, from all sorts of sources, from the news sources we listen to and or watch. You know, we get these views. We haven't really come to them ourselves. We've been told these things. So we do it. So you do it with regard to people you know. You might start thinking something about someone in the workplace or someone you know in the pub or something. You might start off thinking they're a good person. You may spend a long time considering them a friend or whatever, or vice versa. You might think, "Wow, what a bloody pillock" when you first meet them. But over time, there may be aspects of their character you're exposed to which will cause you to reassess this view. You may find that the fact that they seem unprepossessing, and you may find them challenging. You may find you don't agree with a lot of the views and whatever. Yet over time you find that other aspects of their character you respect and admire, and you change your view, and you come to like them. And it works the other way. Someone you initially think you like, after a while, you're exposed more to them, and you find, Jesus Christ, they're an irritating prat, or they hold views, as it turns out, that you really, really cannot go along with. And if you're wondering what the sound in the background is, that's Charles Bronson speaking French. There's a film of it. It's I thought for a change I have some background noise here. And the film was called Riders on the Rain. It's a film that Charles Bronson made in France in the early 70s. He became an icon in France in the 70s, late 60s, early 70s. He made a number of films there. I'm watching it, or was watching, half watching it, out of sheer fascination, because normally when this film is shown here in the UK, it's in an English language version, in which Charles Bronson has his own voice, isn't dubbed, as you can hear there, possibly, with a French actor's voice, and all the French actors, or most of them, are dubbed by English actors. Some actually dubbed themselves into English. But this version, curiously, showing on a streaming channel, is the French language version with English subtitles. And I'm saying Charles Bronson is dubbed by a gravelly voiced French actor. He sounds a bit like Charles Bronson. In fact, the actor sounds much like it's curious. I can't quite believe it. But there's a curious bit in this film where, because Bronson's playing an American, obviously, even though he's speaking French. where he meets with some American colleagues, and they all speak English, even this French language version, but they're dubbed into English by other actors. Bronson's still dubbed by the actor doing his French voice in the brief English language sequence, and I assume in the French language version that would have subtitles coming up, French subtitles. Anyway, it's curious. It's an odd little thing. It has a certain relevance, though. Charles Bronson was an actor I didn't really rate when I was younger, but after many years changed my mind about, because I mean, even when he was alive, when I was a kid, the joke was, of course, he was stone-faced, his expression never changed, he always played the same character, and there's an element of truth in that. But over the years I've seen more and more of his films and learned to judge him not particularly toward the end of his career. He's making those bloody awful films for the likes of Cannon and Michael Winner, and they were pretty awful, the Death Wish spin-offs and things like that, and they were pretty awful, and he just went through the motions, and I don't blame him, he was getting paid for doing that. But when you see him in films at Riders on the Rain, even in French, you notice he's a much more expressive actor than given credit for, and a much better actor than you give him credit, because it's remarkable. He puts over quite a few subtleties of characterization, even though he is fairly limited as an actor, things like facial expressions and so on. It's surprising, quite surprising. Although famously, of course, or infamously, Robert Mitchum once worked with him on a film, Via Rides, also co-starred Yul Brynner, and apparently Robert Mitchum remarked to friends afterwards he couldn't understand why Charles Bronson was so popular, as he thought he was such a crap actor. But Via Rides, incidentally, a little fun fact for you, first film in which Bronson has his trademark tash, and that's as late as 1968. But yes, I changed my mind through experiencing his films and watching them and realising that, appreciating what he's doing in them, really. You know, he's presenting these apparently unemotional characters who underneath he does subtly hint at something beneath that you know, this is just a facade, and that underneath he has all these feelings that he cannot express, or feels because of the role the character feels because of the role they are forced to play as a tough guy or something. They are not allowed to express these feelings normally, and has to suppress them. There you go. But I mentioned Robert Mitchum. There was another actor where I changed my mind on him as a kid. He always looked half asleep, and I mean, he admitted that himself. You know, as he said, some of his films he really was asleep, and they just painted eyeballs on his eyelids, and he just walked his way through them. But again, as I got older and watched more of his better films, I came to understand Mitchum and his characterizations more. That incredibly, again, it's the facade of the laid-back tough guy who isn't really, who again has all these feelings and passions that he can only express in this laconic way. He was, without doubt, one of the best Philip Marlowes on film ever. It was a pity that he wasn't cast in the role until he was well into middle age and really a bit too old to be playing it. But he nevertheless was superb in capturing this character who has this laid-back, cynical facade, and yet underneath it, not that far beneath the surface, is a certain sense of honor and nobility in what he does. And it's fascinating to watch. I mean, he played Marlowe in two films. 1975's Farewell, My Lovely, which is set in period. And he's excellent in that. And then he played him again in a remake of The Big Sleep a couple of years later, which was directed by Michael Winner, who I was dismissing is Charles Bronson. But it's one of Michael Winner's better films. But because they didn't want it compared directly to the Bogart and Bacall version of The Big Sleep, it was relocated to the UK rather bizarrely, the story, and updated to the 1970s. But nevertheless, it's a much better film than most people give it credit for. It has an excellent cast, and again, if nothing else, watch it for Mitchum's performance. Again, yes, does that with it. It's impossible not to have some sort of admiration for his character, his characterization of Marlowe, the way he goes through it and everything he endures in it. It's remarkable, the performance. But there you see, your mind can be changed even on relatively trivial things about the reputations of actors and what you think of them. But it's done through experience. You experience these things.
Oh, yes, this is... Well, I have to say, the big red pill that I was talking about in 2016, it wasn't so much that I changed my life outlook and what I looked for in life and the world, more than it being painfully demonstrated to me that I wasn't paying full attention, and people whom I was putting my faith into, yes, what they represented, and, the political party that they belonged to had represented certain values that I support and fought against other things that I do not. And this had shifted, and I was continuing to give credence and not question the political party. And I question everything. So, I wasn't really bad. I just, it took the artist Shaman Q back in 2016. I was really lost because I was a huge Sanders supporter in 2016. If you go back, I think some of my shows in the summer of 2016 reflect that. And I lost faith in him, really. You want to talk about having your mind change just by all the strength that I thought this man had. He just completely compromised himself, in my opinion, at a certain point. And it took the artist Shaman Q showing me what was going on. And we went back and forth for weeks and weeks on this until finally it clicked in my head that while, yes, Donald Trump is not the greatest thing since sliced bread, Donald Trump has done some pretty unethical business things in his past. He's not the greatest person the world has ever seen. But when you hire an attorney, you want to hire somebody who knows the ins and outs. You hire a shark. You don't hire some pillar of society. And for certain jobs, perhaps somebody who, I don't know, at the time, and I still say this, I think we are going to come to regret not having elected or re-elected Trump I mean, run and hide. Oh, what a terrible thing to say. Oh, but that's just how I feel. And I mean, I certainly can be proven wrong. I mean, tomorrow, this administration could come up with something and do something. And who knows what tomorrow's going to bring as far as all that goes. But as it stands right here today, yeah, I cannot support very much that this administration that we've put in power is doing, thinking, suggesting, or otherwise. And again, your experience probably or may vary to a slight or great degree. And hey, someday you'll be on the exit ramp, and maybe we can actually have a little back and forth on this, because that's really what it's going to take to change. I mean, I am not unreceptive to going back to being at least somewhat more. I consider myself really towards centrist, because if you think that I am accepted and appreciated by Trump followers, no, that's just not really true at all. And I have friends on both extremes that over the last couple of years I have unfriended. Both sides. I mean, if they're too strident, they just keep repeating the same things and posting the same memes over and over like a mantra, and you try to engage them at all, that they cannot abide even the slightest question of on any slight variance of what they are preaching. You have to agree with them and take the whole cake. You can't pick out the raisins, or you're just a terrible person. Those on both sides, again, those are the people whom I have had to remove from my day-to-day existence, because there's just, I don't need anybody who's going to sing me the same song over and over and over again. That's not. There are no songs that I want to hear that many times. There are songs I like, and another mind change that just happened for whatever reason. Although I think the band changed, and this is an arts thing. You remember, if you're a listener, and I still like all the older King Gizzard music. I still stand behind any of the reviews I've done of their music up to now. But they've come out with several albums, EPs, whatever. I just, nothing on any of them. I mean, it's not bad. It just isn't what grabbed me in the first place. And that's just, things change. Oh, do things change?
But of course, what I started off talking about, this idea that you only change one's fundamental beliefs as a result of major life changes or trauma. I think that comes from the fact that, yeah, I mean, I've had major life changes forced upon me, and it doesn't so much as change your mind about things. It leads you to reassess perhaps one's life and where one is and what's important to you, and that's slightly different. That's slightly different to changing your mind on something fundamental, like if you're a racist, suddenly embracing multiculturalism, or if you're an atheist, becoming a devout Catholic, or vice versa, a Catholic losing their faith and becoming a non-believer, or converting from one religion to another. That's different. Those also might come from some traumatic experience one has, but that's rather different to the reassessment of one's priorities in life, which was Charles Bronson in French again. That's Marlene Jobert. But yeah, but it yeah, I'm not sure they are the same things altogether. I mean, certainly I've had life-changing experiences. Yeah, I've been illness, and once going through a traumatic, well, twice I've been put through fairly traumatic experiences in my work life. Once I went through the whole process and was sacked from a job. And I'm not going to go into all the details again about that. It's many years ago now. But you have time to think, when you're going through these processes and reevaluate everything and question your actions which have led to this situation. But that's not quite the same thing as changing your mind about things. I questioned and reassessed things I'd done and came to the conclusion I might have done them differently. But fundamentally, it didn't change my mind on whether I was right or wrong about what I did. I still to this day would say I wasn't necessarily wrong. I would do it differently in retrospect. But as I say, it led to a reassessment of what was important in my life. The same as when I was very ill a few years ago. It leads to a reassessment. It doesn't necessarily change your mind because all you're doing is reevaluating things, and what you find really is not your core values and beliefs you challenge. It's just the way in which one pursues them, perhaps. That's the reality. I mean, I didn't have a sudden revelation that materialism wasn't really what I was into. I'd always known that, really. It'd been the other way round for a while. I bought in, or I tried to buy into the idea that I was really interested in things like workplace promotions and the status it brought and all this, and the idea of a career and that sort of thing. And all the things like medical trauma, troubles in the workplace led me to reassess and realise actually it didn't change my mind. It just meant that I've been deceiving myself. It'd been the other way round. I'd tried to talk myself into believing these other things were important to me, even though I knew all the time they weren't. And once you let go of these pretensions and ideas, false ideas, you feel a lot happier, I find. Which isn't to say I decided to become a pauper or something, or give away all my worldly goods. But I found I could live a very good and satisfying life on without the big wages, without the status, perceived status, and all that sort of thing, and the promotions and any of that nonsense. I realised that was all fake and didn't matter. But that's not the same as changing one's mind about things, necessarily, because that had always been my underlying belief. But it was the idea that these things were important, money, status, material possessions, was part of the underlying received wisdom of the community I existed in, of society generally at the time. And that's the other thing about beliefs. That's the thing about belief systems. I said before, we are informed in these things by society, by our communities, about the company we keep. Because the reality is we say we change our minds, but we don't. The reality is that often we will do and say things simply so we appear to conform and go along with the group. We've all done it. I have. I know. Or we simply do not state our actual true belief. because, hey, it might make us stand out. And that's a lot of hassle, and you don't want the trouble. You don't want to rock the boat and all that. And then people hear you, maybe at some other point, express an opinion you didn't then, and they think, my God, he's changed his mind about that. No, I just didn't. For the sake of going along with the group, I didn't express that view at the time, my true opinions at the time. And we all do that. And perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps we shouldn't. Perhaps we should all state exactly what we believe all the time and have massive arguments, because there's always somebody argumentative in that group who will argue the point with you. But I just don't want that. There are, of course, the contrarians in life who take the exact opposite and will take up positions simply because they are the contrary to the groups, not necessarily because they do believe in them fundamentally, but because they want to be different somehow. They're often, I find them, they're often pub bores if you're down the pub. When I went to when I was a regular pub goer in my local, there was a fellow there who's like that. Jesus Christ. I used to do my best to avoid him, as did a lot of other people. He wasn't necessarily an unpleasant person in himself. But Jesus, he was always looking for an argument. And as most of the rest of us said, I don't come to the pub for an argument. I come here for a drink and a quiet chat with to relax, have a quiet chat with friends and acquaintances. I'm not looking for an argument. But boy oh boy, he did. And for a quiet life, one would often just nod and say and just go along with whatever he's saying, in the hope that he'd get bored and bugger off and pass to some other group of people. And then, of course, he'd assume you changed your mind about something when he'd overhear you speaking to somebody else, giving an opinion that is entirely contrary to the one he'd been espousing, but which you hadn't challenged him on a couple of nights before. Oh dear, these bloody contrarians, they really get on my tits. All of which, in a roundabout way, brings me to another thought that is this strange thing in modern society. This is sort of related to the topic, that we should all have an opinion on everything. It's any issue that comes up, you're expected to have an opinion on. I blame it on the internet, social media, because people are on there all the time. Any issue, by God, they're on there telling us their opinions and whatever. That's the thing, it's anonymity on the web, and you can say these things to strangers. It's not the same necessarily as saying it in public or with the group pressure. We seem to have lost the concept that it's okay to say, actually, I don't know enough about this to actually have an informed opinion, therefore I'm staying out of it. People, oh no, you must do that, because they think we should have this opinion that's a fixed opinion, which you can't change your mind. That's the other thing, Yeah, I might think something about a subject one day, but as I say, once I learn more about it, maybe I'll change my mind. That's the way it is. Although I will say, as I try to wrap up this rambling contribution, what I would say is that that in my experience, of course, the less rational the belief someone has, the less likely they are ever to change their mind about it. As I said before, you can't do it. You can't persuade like crazy conspiracy theorists. You cannot do it through rational argument, because that's the whole point of a conspiracy theory. It isn't rational. It isn't about the facts. It's about which facts are convenient. It's a so rational argument won't change their minds. They're only going to change it. Only experiences will change it. It's like COVID deniers who have to actually get COVID and nearly die to believe that it is a potentially deadly disease, a debilitating disease, a virus, and that maybe it might be a good idea to be vaccinated against it. Especially if you're an at-risk group. But as I say, that's experience led them to change their mind. It's not any kind of rational argument. Rationality, I'm afraid, very rarely comes into changing people's minds, which I'm sure will be a disappointment to politicians and some politicians who try and use rational argument, philosophers and whatever, everywhere. Because actually, another little digression, politics, another area where many of us have very fixed ideas and rarely change our minds. And that's the interesting thing, that there's two schools of thought with what politicians should do to get votes. Either they make rational arguments to persuade people over to those wavering voters. There's the floating voters, the people who can be persuaded because their particular political beliefs aren't that one way or the other, aren't that strong. Now, either you make a rational argument to persuade them, or as is more common nowadays, it's always been common. It's always been the way with a lot of politicians, especially ones who like themselves as populists. Instead, you come up with a rhetoric which appeals to their underlying prejudices to get them onto your side. Their prejudices they may not even have been consciously aware they had, or may have denied they had, these people. But you come up with rhetoric that somehow appeals to that, and try and get them over onto your side that way. But as I say, you're not really changing their minds, because their minds never were really made up one way or the other. The people whose minds were made up, they're not going to be shifted. I mean, I look back here to the EU referendum, and this is hands up, I voted to stay. I'm very anti-Brexit. I think a lot of the Brexiteers are absolute idiots. Not all. There were perfectly rational, there were good rational arguments as why it might have been a good idea to leave the EU, but they weren't rehearsed in the debate. Instead, what people like Nigel Farage and people at the extreme end of Brexit, what they did was rhetoric largely based upon anti-immigration views, scares about immigrants, all this sort of thing, which appealed to underlying prejudices, anti-immigrant prejudice, even racist prejudices amongst voters that they might not even have consciously realised they had. They were underlying as a result of communities, upbringings and whatever. That's what they did, rather than go the rational route. Anyway, I'm rambling even more here. And I'm sorry I haven't changed my mind that that people never change their minds. But yeah, as I said, it's not usually rational argument which changes people's minds. It's not necessarily even major life traumas, whatever, or massive life changes forced upon you, which change your mind on fundamental beliefs. It's general life experience, usually over a long period, which which can influence people's beliefs and change their minds. Now, maybe you might argue traumas and life-changing events constitute major bits of experience must accelerate it. Maybe, maybe not. But I do think it's a long-term process when you change your mind. Very few people, when they have strongly held beliefs, change their minds easily. But people can and do change their minds, even on fundamental strongly held beliefs. But there you go. I'll stop rambling now and say back to you, PQ.
I don't know. I can see like many sides of this. People who have pre-existing conditions, people who are living in more densely populated regions, and I'm just a hermit anyways. I mean, people who are out at the clubs or out and about in restaurants and malls and shopping all the time, they're dealing with a completely different set of logistics than I am here in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, and that's something that factors into this all. And you discuss contrarians. A lot of people see me as one, and sometimes I see myself as one, and I have to stop and do a little reflection. But at least, and if you catch me, I mean, if we are working, any of you, if you catch me just being a knee-jerk contrarian, call me on it. Because the way I'm seeing it is, I'm not so much a contrarian as when somebody is expressing their opinion to me, relating something to me, I'm listening, and it's like I'm listening to a story or watching a film, or something is being related to me, and I'm following, and yes, this makes sense, and yes, this could lead to this, and yes, that's true. And when something suddenly doesn't fit, I'm like, maybe even to make an analogy, I'm playing Sherlock Holmes, and somebody is feeding me all the clues that support that this guy over here killed him over there, and I don't know. When suddenly the things just drop in my head, I've learned I used to be a lot worse, but I'm eventually going to say something. I might be more or less diplomatic at different times, depending on my blood sugar, probably more so than anything else. Because if nothing else, when I disagree with somebody, I don't like bullying or pushing, or like, oh man, it's like some of these celebrities who are, oh, no. That's we live in a country where we have freedom of opinion, and you can believe what you like. But if we're going to discuss it, for me, I would like you to be able to somehow at least make a case that I can follow, or be able to go back and forth a little without it getting very heated. But yeah, it gets tricky. It really is. And part of it is our communication skills in general as a species, as a society. And yeah, we're all working on this, hopefully. And hopefully we're learning. And I don't know so much as being receptive to having one's mind changed, but receptive to understanding why perhaps other people might feel differently. And moving right along. I was confused or misled or something. In the can as of now, we have Frank Edward Nora, and that is it. Although it's earlier than we usually close the gates, so and Frank's segment, something could pop in. I mean, what I'm thinking is maybe we will hear from Chad, but he just released a Chadcast, and I have a segment in the can that's part of that Chadcast that's going to be on the next Quake Reversal satellite as well, which, that is coming. So there's that to think about sometime in the next couple of days. That's almost a lead pipe cinch guarantee that'll be happening. So if you hear this and you have a follow-up on our topic here, you should consider following the instructions at the end of this program and throwing in your 2 cents. But as I said, in the meantime, we have Frank Edward Nora.
So we've all seen that meme where there's a guy sitting there at this kind of this little desk set up in a park. He's holding a cup of coffee, and he has sort of this weird smile on his face. He's holding up the cup of coffee. And he has a sign in front of his desk which says something and then change my mind. And this is a meme where there's been tons of different variants of it. But here's the origin of that change my mind meme. There's a site called knowyourmeme.com. So Stephen Crowder's Change My Mind campus sign is a photograph of American-Canadian conservative podcaster Stephen Crowder seated behind a sign that reads, "Male privilege is a myth. Change my mind." Now, I don't think I have ever heard of this guy beyond this meme. So, male privilege is a myth. Change my mind. Outside of Texas Christian University. Since its upload via Crowder's Twitter account in February 2018, the photograph has been turned into an exploitable template for online parodies. So the origin... So I guess the concept is he was just... setting this place up to sort of say, this sort of provocative statement, and I guess he wanted people to come up and change his mind. So, let's see... on February 16th, 2018, comedian Stephen Crowder tweeted a picture of himself, this is sort of repeating, seated behind a sign that reads, "Male privilege is a myth, change my mind." And the caption, "Hello, at TCU, come one, come all, change my mind." The picture is part of Crowder's podcast and YouTube, in which he attempts to have people with opposing viewpoints convince him of various issues. The post, shown below, received more than 900 retweets and 6,400 likes in 4 days. I wonder if it did change his mind. I don't know. I mean, I guess there's a podcast involved here. I really don't know. Shortly after Crowder posted the image on February 18th, people began photoshopping different images onto the photograph. Twitter user, replaced Crowder's head with crying Michael Jordan. User Ian Whetstone tweeted the image with a sign to read, the clitoris is a myth. Change my mind. Change my mind. On February 19th, Twitter user Realish Kyle tweeted the image with the sign Photoshop to read, "Gonna drink this mug of hot piss. Change my mind." Wow, that post received more than 200 retweets and 1,500 likes. This is the world today. This is actually years ago now. A couple years ago now, how people enjoy like changing images to have different messages. Memes. That day, Redditors on the Dank Memes subreddit began posting photoshops of the image. Redditor X Zerito posted a version that reads, "Traps are not gay, change my mind." Received more than 5,000 points. Great. Yeah, so it's just kind of, let's see if there's any good. I mean, I think I've seen a few interesting ones. Pluto is not a planet. Changed my mind. Whatever. Anyway, this site is good because who knows in the future? Like, they actually got a little bit of the information how this all got started. Oh wait, there's a lot more here. Let me see. Let's see if there's any good ones. Yeah, I started seeing a lot of these all over the place. But yeah, this sort of points out changed minds, right? Is this even possible at this point to change someone's mind? And it's interesting because I was talking about this issue of the mind. So basically, the mind is sort of our operating system, right? We are ultimately this whole process is an absolute mystery because, right, one aspect of the mind is the consciousness, right, which we don't know what that is. There is some capacity to observe and to experience, which, for the sake of this discussion, we are just going to say it exists. We don't know what it is, right? But it is us. We are it. We are the observers, but we don't know what we are. Okay. But the mind is like an operating system, right? It is seemingly like a computer. It's like a device, right? Which could consist of the brain, which is obviously a biological computer, and then any other systems that it's attached to that we don't really know about. So we don't know what exactly the mind is either. So we're already dealing with two things, but the consciousness is completely we have no idea what that is, even though we are it all the time. The mind, though, I think is more understandable and measurable in terms of how it works, right? I think that some people think it's just the brain. Some people think it's the brain connected to other things. But we know that, for example, the mind is concerned with each of us has a mind as human beings, and we essentially have a human body that is a biological machine, and we have this input-output. And so we know that the mind is able to take care of a lot of the body's functions without us having to be aware of it, right? The idea being that a lot of stuff is going on in the body, but we're not aware of it. We don't know, like the beating of the heart, the operation of the digestion, and all sorts of stuff like that, right? The operations of the various organs. We don't have to consciously worry about that stuff. The mind is doing that in a subconscious level, right? So it's not something that we are aware of, right? The consciousness does not have to be concerned with these operations, right? But there's one operation that clearly the mind takes care of, breathing, which we can also take conscious control of, which is really interesting because this is, I don't know how many other functions there are. I mean, maybe walking, for example, you want to walk somewhere, you just think walk, and though you could take conscious control of how your legs are moving, things like that, right? So there's a few things there that we can sort of notice the subconscious control versus the conscious control, right, in the mind. But these are just examples to kind of get to what we're really thinking about. Why is it that people perceive the world so differently and believe things so fervently, right? Why would we want to change someone's mind? Because we feel that they have come to accept or believe or perceive something that is really completely wrong. We want to change their mind. So, the idea is that another function of the mind is to collect and to take all of the information, the sensory information and situational information, interpretive information at any given moment and package it up in a simplified signal to deliver to the consciousness. Now, again, this is a topic I talked about recently. The idea of taking complex information and distilling it down to something more simple and delivering it to a consciousness is itself such a mystery. To me, it's incredibly mysterious. I mean, we can kind of understand processing information and resulting in a simplified signal, right? The signal then somehow delivered to a consciousness. I mean, what is the form of the final signal? What is the form of the delivery to the consciousness? Which is seemingly the consciousness is not here; it's somewhere else. What is it? What is it? A beam? Is there a wire in higher dimensions? Is there some sort of transmission? How the hell is this signal transmitted to the consciousness? I know people might think the consciousness is sort of seated within the body in some way, or that if we have a soul, that's the consciousness. But it does not seem that any physical construct or constructs made of other forms of matter, we think of the human body as potentially extending. For example, our physical body could be extending into 4 or 5 or 6 dimensional space, even on the kind of matter we feel as our body. Then there's these indications that there exists different kinds of matter, whether it's just regular matter existing parallel in a 4th or 5th dimension, or there's a finer kind of matter. We always think of ghosts, the astral body. The idea that we have this astral body that is overlaying our physical body, that when the body physically dies, the astral body, it can continue on, which is sort of the mechanism of the earlier parts of the afterlife, right? But in none of these cases would the existence of a structure, essentially a machine, contain consciousness. But I'm trying to avoid the question of consciousness because there's really no answers right now. So what we're left with is this idea that in every moment, right, of our conscious waking life, the idea is that we receive sensory input through the 5 senses, right? We're sort of perceiving things visually, sound, the 5 senses: touch, smell, and taste. Smell and taste are kind of related, but yeah. Anyway. Wouldn't those be sort of half senses? Or no, I guess not. They're both full-fledged senses. Anyway, that's not those. So that's part of the input of every moment. We're kind of having this input here. Then there is so that's not all the input, right? So basically, that is the stuff that is being fed into a system where, what I believe pretty clearly, inside each person's mind, there is a replica of the world that we sort of use to figure things out, right? So because we've had experiences in this physical world, and we can construct scenarios in this interior version of the world in order to sort of further contextualize and understand what we're seeing, to understand the situation that we're in, right? So 5 senses plus this internal world, and then plus other aspects, intuitions, subtler senses that we may not be aware of, psychic senses that may be operating at a very low level, but that may still be there. Emotional simulators, that is the theory of mind, that is not just a 3D world, but that we need to, when dealing with other people, we need to sort of imagine what they're thinking and what they're feeling. So we need these simulators inside the mind to estimate another person's reaction. We need to sort of not just simulate in physical space, but we need to also simulate another person's internal state. So their thought process, their emotional state, and indeed another person's internal world, which is how they view the world. So when we're dealing with other people, we have to sort of model them as well, right? So there's these levels of modeling that go into the moment-to-moment activities, and these aspects are all very observable in terms of there's people that have difficulty with that. So there's people that don't have a theory of mind. That is, they're not able to really understand that mechanism inside their mind is flawed, right? That some people are not able to put themselves in other people's shoes. It's that their internal simulation has limitations, right? And they're not able to perceive that, which does cause difficulties. And another example is facial recognition, right? When we see a person's face and we recognize them, right? This is another function of the mind where these incredibly subtle measurements, the distance between the nose and the eyes, etc., is able to produce this overlay of meaning that delivers to us, oh, that's this person, right? You recognize people in ways that are, right, it's an incredibly subtle process where you're not experiencing those levels of calculation and measurement. You're just receiving a signal of meaning with, oh, there's that person, right? And we know that there are people, rare condition, have face blindness, that particular function they don't have in their mind system. So they look at people and they can't really recognize them the way most people can. They're lacking that system. And of course, there's language processing, where what you're doing right now, you're hearing this series of sounds that I'm making, and because you know the language, your mind is taking this audio signal and converting it to meaning, right? As you know, like when you're too far away from people talking, and sort of sounds like that, right? You're hearing people talking, but you're not getting the meaning. You know. So you need to be hearing it clearly enough to be able to transform that signal. Another good example of this is shown in optical illusions, right? That the visual processing system, optical illusions are phenomena that challenge that system. That is, there's these pictures you can look at, and it looks like they're moving, but they really aren't, because the normal processing would be that type of image would be something that is moving, right? So the meaning overlaid on visual signals in terms of optical illusions, we're sort of seeing kind of how that interpretive system works. In terms of when I say overlaying meaning and delivering it to the consciousness, again, we don't really understand what that stage is. What is meaning, right? How are you? It's a signal or delivery or an understanding that we can consciously receive that contains meaning besides the visual and the audio. There's a meaning overlaid on it, and that is something that, again, I find very mysterious. I do think that what I'm talking about, which is what we're all experiencing all the time, every day, consciousness and meaning, we don't understand. I don't believe we understand it at all. It's the nature of our existence, not where is God far off in the cosmos, something that's so far away. It's right here. It is central and happening all the time, and it's a complete mystery of how it all operates. So I think the idea is that, right, at this level of a consciousness, that we are receiving a distilled, a simplified signal of meaning based on all of this interpretive stuff, all the stuff I've been talking about. You receive this signal. And you might wonder, well, being that whatever consciousness is, couldn't we be aware of 1,000, 10,000, a million times more stuff, right? Could we be aware of all the interpretive signals and all of this stuff? Well, in that case, the quality of life would be much different, right? We would be operating on a completely different level. And maybe some people are, I don't know. But the idea is that, to me, this is a system that is, I'm just weirdly, this is all very strange stuff to talk about, even though it is everything we do all day long. The idea is that clearly the story we're perceiving, the narrative that we're a part of, has to do with each of us being inside one human being for an entire human lifetime, right? And our experience of it is really from the perspective of the human being. The idea that the nature of the perceptual signal package, that is, how much or how little is the mind simplifying things, right, seems to be core to it, right? That seems to be what we would think of as intelligence, right? That is...
My. We've stepped into whole new territories here. That this is a deep and rich, Frank. This is just great to be absorbing. Consciousness in and of itself. Yeah, I guess you would have to understand consciousness in and of itself in order to seriously discuss the changing of the mind, so to speak. Some say that, it's a chemical soup up there. I don't know. But Frank is just really like blowing my mind here with some really deep pondering. But this is the deep pondering you get into, and there is no answer because a local system trying to describe itself without an outer context becomes just, it's like chasing your own tail at a certain point. And almost every day we learn tiny little new things about, one, how our consciousness and memory can fail us totally. We all experience this, especially as we get older. We find out that something we remember, we've got the chronology just a little off, somewhere between when things happen and when we recollect them, they get just a little jumbled. We are, and like Frank said, the science cannot figure out or determine. In fact, the facts and the information we have up to now seems to imply that while we have this gray matter in our head that is processing all this information, one, the storage of memory may be in, for want of a better term, a cloud somewhere else. They can't find where your memory is amid all that gray matter when they're messing around with it. And then, of course, you got the phenomenon where you could put all of us OnSug hosts into a room and let's say stage a event that we would all witness from wherever we wind up seated and positioned. And nobody is going to have the same story after this is all over, which is why it is fascinating when we all get together and examine a specific thing. I mean, if we all perceive the same thing, this show would serve almost no purpose because we would all just basically, with a few variations, say the same exact thing. So you see, you got that too.
Clearly, the input involving, even in any visual field, millions of different objects, sound interpretation, which is so complex if you really think about it. It's just one wave operating at multiple frequencies at once, right? All of the reinterpretation done in the internal models of the world and models of other people's minds, right? That we could imagine this process being able to deliver a much more complex signal to the consciousness, right? Or a less complex signal to the consciousness. So what is the way that it decides at what level to distill it down and finally deliver it, right? So I would say then that we have a range that we could potentially label as intelligence, right? And if you look at the bell curve of IQ, which is itself has become rather politicized, you sort of see there's a range, right? There's a range where the midpoint is IQ 100. That's the average, and that's most people. And the right-hand side is higher than that. The left-hand side is lower than that. And the number of people that are higher and lower seem to be even. Right? The number of people that are 20% higher, 20%, 120 is really the same amount of people that are at IQ 80, IQ 120, IQ 80. When you get something like 150 and then 50, there's much less people. Right? So there's a range. So there's clearly a minimum level of intelligence where someone is, unable to, would be unable to take care of themselves, but can live and survive with other people helping them. Some sort of minimum. But then it's weird how there is that percentage is equal to the higher percentage. So that almost seems to be a limiter. You might think like minimum possible intelligence, even just to stay alive. But you would think that there's really no limit to higher intelligence. But it seems to be in that bell curve. And I don't know how perfectly symmetrical it is, but it's interesting how that happens. But anyway, that to me represents, in general, the range of how this distillation process works. Making it simple versus making it complex. But, this process, right? If you think about like someone that's a genius, they have 150 IQ, right? So the information is being distilled down, but still with a lot of the complexity to it. I would have to imagine that the full complexity would be like IQ 1 million. The full complexity of the stuff, right? And I think that we can definitely look at the mind as functioning essentially as a survival tool, right? So that we want to be able to survive a very harsh environment, which we are in, right? Perhaps less harsh now, but back before all of these civilizations and stuff, human beings needed to, and animals as well, have to know how to survive, how to not die from various conditions and various attacks and various situations. Like if there's a cliff, like don't jump off the cliff, like then you'll survive. You'll have a better chance of surviving. We talk about the fight or flight mechanism that is able to, in a very dangerous situation, kind of increase certain aspects of interpretation so that it could increase your chances of survival. But of course, as we've seen, this simplification of the signal has its limitations, right? As you're limiting the signal, right, a number of decisions have to be made in the mind. So, for example, optical illusions and stage magicians are able to exploit these phenomena and make you perceive things that aren't real, right? Because you're not really seeing what's really going on. You're experiencing an interpretive layer that's being delivered to you through the mind. So magicians know that they can fool you and make a tiger appear in a cage that, out of the blue. Even though in reality the tiger was behind there and they opened some sort of hatch, the tiger walked in and. Or do magicians really have teleportation devices? No, I don't think so. They do! No, they don't. They wouldn't need to. But it would be actually pretty, I know there's been a lot of stories like that about magicians that actually do have higher technology or magic, or true magic, which is indistinguishable from technology, blah, 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 while pretending just to be regular magicians, right? That's kind of a trope in, I don't know, that's a whole nother issue. So that we know that the operation of the mind is at some level predictable and can be tricked, right? One thing I talk about is tension myositis syndrome, right? An aspect of the mind. There's books by a guy named Dr. John Sarno, especially lower back pain that has this epidemic in our society. Doesn't exist in other societies where they do back-breaking labor. This is a sort of a flaw of the mind in which it will try to avoid having the conscious mind thinking about emotionally painful things, for example. It will actually create actual physical pain by manipulating muscles in the body to distract the individual from these issues. Whereas I would believe in most cases, you would rather think about the emotionally painful thing than experience the excruciating back pain. But the mind is functioning at a level that doesn't necessarily interpret it that way. And it was in one of Howard Stern's books that he went to Dr. Sarno for back pain, and he also was cured of OCD, having to count things and tap things certain numbers of times. It turns out that may also be a function of the mind to distract you from thinking about things. That is, in a way, what it puts in front of the conscious mind, right, is a selective subset of the information that exists. So the technique, and I do use the technique, if I ever feel a twinge of back pain, it is simply that I'll tell my mind, oh, you're trying to distract me from thinking about emotionally painful things. And I've made a list, and I'm like, I am going to think about these things 1,000 times more every time I feel a twinge of back pain. And the mind quickly backs off from producing that pain. Of course, that's not to say that all back pain is of this type, but it's a subset of back pain, right? So in this way, we're seeing that the mind is using different strategies to kind of regulate the kind of matters and thoughts and issues that are presented to the conscious mind, right? The idea being that the mind kind of is designed to shelter the mind from all but what is actually necessary to sort of operate in this world. Now, when you think about how it all works, right, having a sensory inputs is one thing, but I think that when we talk about that internal model of the world, is basically the main way that we function. We have an internal copy of the world inside our mind where we run scenarios, and it's how we understand things, right? That internal copy of the world is, I would say, and this is an issue I've actually wondered about. There's an internal copy of the world, there's an external copy of the world. Are they really separate, or are they different aspects of the same thing? But I believe that we can at least approach the problem in that when a person is born, they have a sort of a blank slate, a blank mind, and then they have the capacity that as they, as a baby opens its eyes and starts seeing things, it can start to look around the room that it's in, and then it'll build that room inside its baby mind, right? And essentially that we're every moment that we're in a physical space or observe human behavior, we're updating our internal model, right? And I'm sure this would only be one of many ways this operates, but the idea that we build our internal world based on interactions with the quote-unquote real world, quote-unquote real world. But right, you see what I'm saying, right? Like, I like, especially recently, going back to New York City. Like, I remember 42nd Street being one way. That's the last time I saw it. But now it's a bit changed because a lot of businesses have gone out of business and there's new buildings and stuff. So as I go and even just a couple, like yesterday, was it yesterday? No, yeah, it was 2 days ago, on Thursday, today's Saturday. So as I'm walking down the 42nd Street as it exists now, my internal model of 42nd Street is updated, right? This is how 42nd Street is currently, but I can still remember how it was in the past, right? The idea being that you're adding to your internal model from the latest perceptions, and again, your models of other people. As you continue interacting with people, you update your internal model of them, right? So the idea is that this internal model really is, when we think about your mind, changing your mind, it's this internal model that I think is the biggest aspect of someone's viewpoints, right? Their perceptions, right? So we know that some stuff, such as like, the physical condition of things, when you're exposed to new information, you can update it. But then there is a whole realm of aspects of the internal world, right, which cannot be tested, right? This is where we get into belief and perception, right? These are things that cannot be tested. So when it comes to religion, for example, that that the nature of God and the rules God has set down, for example, in religions or cults, these are all things that can be modeled inside of your mind that cannot be tested. You would not normally have a test for that. That is, someone will be like, Jesus died for your sins and he's the only way to get to heaven, so be Christian. Well, in your daily life, you're not going to really be able to test for that. You see what I'm saying? So this is a piece of information that you sort of, when you're in a place where people are telling you there's a God called Jesus and you need to believe in him, that goes into your internal model, right? And there's no way to test for it. So this is where things get pretty shaky when it comes to this process. And when it comes to political views, right? We talk about these big societal problems. How do we solve these problems?